to everybody. A warm welcome at this virtual meeting again of the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee, this time for the first time using MS Teams rather than Skype for Business. Various things I need to say about this committee still apply, of course, not least that it's independent in its nature. We try to be non-political, apolitical. And that's something that I readily and I'm expected to say at the start of our meetings that was agreed some time ago as in relation to our terms of reference. And in relation to the conduct of this virtual meeting, as county councillors and officers will be aware already, there's a difference from Skype in that there is a facility to light up the hand symbol at the top if you want to speak, but as there is this flexibility to chairs of especially the formal meetings such as a committee like this, I'm opting to have the preference of still use RTS, i.e. request to speak. So it's a matter of keying in the meeting chat, which is accessed by the conversation icon at the top to the left of the hand. So my preference is to use that, and so that I'll be opening, as I already have, the meeting chat viewing, and I can see by that whenever RTS appears, and that tells me the order of things. I know there is a facility to do that with the hands if I look at the participation list, but you can't look at both at the same time. It's either one or the other. So we'll still go for the RTS, especially as this is a formal meeting. And it's a welcome also not only to so-called external people, Paul Dossett from our external auditors, Grant Thornton, but also to Terry Whitehead and Irene Devine, who have joined us this afternoon. And they are members of the LCC Conduct Committee. And there are not one but two items relating to Code of Conduct on the agenda this afternoon, items 4 and 5. So Terry and Irene, when we come to that, you're welcome to indicate RTS if you want to say anything. And you're welcome to remain after those items if you wish. You don't have to, but you're welcome to do. Please, Deborah, intervene or mention if you think I've missed anything off as we go along, especially in these introductory comments.
No problem.
There's also, as well as RTS, if members have a declaration of interest to declare, but this is item 2, which we'll come to soon anyway. It's a matter of typing DOI. And if you're leaving the meeting before the end, type exit, so that Deborah in particular and me are aware of that. The instant messaging facility should not be used for any private conversations during the meeting or asking questions. It's a matter of indicating that you do want to speak or ask a question. Otherwise, we get to the danger of more than one meeting going on at the same time, if you see what I mean. When you are not speaking, please mute your microphone and, of course, unmute when you are speaking. And if anybody is dialing into the meeting, which I don't think is the case, then there is a matter of using *6 to mute and *6 again to unmute. Members are reminded to speak slowly and clearly, and that they are being watched and recorded through the webcast. So, have we got any apologies for absence, Deborah?
No apologies for absence from members. Just Paul Bond won't be present today, but Josh Minot will be intervening where necessary, where Paul would. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And item 2 on the agenda, are there any disclosures needed of pecuniary, i.e. financial, and non-pecuniary, i.e. sort of controlling influence interests? I take it that's a no. So we move on to agenda item 3, minutes of the last meeting of the committee on the 19th of October, held virtually, of course, via Skype for Business. Would anybody like to propose that they're a correct record?
Yeah, I propose, Chairman.
Thank you, Ed. Anyone to second that, please?
I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Assuming we're all okay on that. It doesn't say matters arising, and in view of the fact that we haven't got on the agenda this time an internal audit update report from head of internal audit, Ruth Lowry, as I've forewarned Ruth about this at the chair's briefing, or as well as that subsequently, it may be as well, Ruth, if you just give an update on internal audit matters briefly, and particularly perhaps you could mention the reference in the minutes to an audit or two that you're doing on decision making in LCC during, especially during the period of the pandemic, if you would please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So yeah, the committee heard at its last meeting that the internal audit plan has been significantly curtailed this year. We're doing very few audits that recognisably follow our normal methodology and that would be regarded as normal audit work. So I have nothing formal to report today, and I've not brought a progress report. The work that I'm doing is largely fact-finding through documents and conversations with the Council's senior management. But I think it's worth saying at this point, I will be providing an opinion at the year end, subject to any unforeseen events between now and the end of March. I expect to be able to provide favourable assurance that the Council's governance, risk management and internal control are operating adequately and effectively. Obviously, this is a slightly peculiar year. The evidence I'll rely on is not what I would normally use without much more substantive work, but I am comfortable that there is evidence for that opinion, and I've shared that with my peers, the Institute of Internal Audits and SIPFA. But we are, though, as the Chair alluded to, doing 2 linked audits of decision making, one of the decisions taken by officers and one of decisions made by councillors. These are focused on compliance with the Constitution. So whilst we could conduct an audit of councillors' decision making without speaking to any councillor, I am aware that this is something that politicians are interested in. And at least one member of this committee expressed an interest in the work when I mentioned it last October. And so I've contacted her to discuss it. And I've since spoken to one of her colleagues too. So it therefore seemed right to contact the other political groups on the committee to ascertain if 1 or 2 of their members would also be prepared to speak to me about the process of decision making and how we keep records. I am not, and I do want to emphasise that, I'm not seeking to engage with the political aspects of decision making. It really would not be proper for an auditor to do so. So this is not really a part of the audit work that's being done by the team, but I think it will provide interesting and informative background in parallel to it. So if any member of this committee wished to raise any observations with me, I would be very happy to hear them in that context. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Ruth, and in particular in relation to those audits on decision making, especially via county councillors. Yes, I think it's good that you've mentioned that why not, other members of the this committee, I'm sure, are free to think about that and perhaps discuss with their colleagues any comments they might want to feed into in the very near future. And when you mention political groups that aren't represented on this committee, obviously, as I said earlier, although it's politically balanced, the membership of this committee via democratic services, it is independent in nature. But there are 2 memberships of political groups on this committee, so to speak. So there is at least one that isn't on it. So you may already have considered that. Okay, any comments from any members of the committee. John, Councillor Shedwick, you've got a comment, I see.
Yes, I'm sure you would wish to confirm you've looked at the minutes. A successful reduced audit obviously relies on the cooperation support of the relevant directors. I'm sure you would wish to confirm that that is the case. I'm sure it will be, and I'm sure you would wish to confirm that.
Thank you. Yes, of course. I have a meeting with one of the directors immediately after this meeting later this afternoon. So yes, that's all going ahead. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other comments from members on those minutes and anything arising from them, is that Councillor Berry, RTS? Yes, please, Julia.
Yes, thank you. I'm really pleased to hear that things are progressing with the audit of decision making. But I'd just like to add or just get some clarification about a policy as it came to County Hall thinking existed, and I just wondered if you might be able to give some insight to it, which contributes and is helpful towards decision making and scrutiny, and that is about having a policy of councillor first. And when I say councillor first, I came believing that in previous administrations, that if something was going on in, say, a council's division, that they would be informed of it. You know, say particularly like something like disposal of property seems to be a bit of an oversight. You know, we sort of get told right at the last minute when it's actually going up for auction. And does this policy exist, and are we do we have an aspiration to try and work with that policy?
Laura or possibly Josh, are you the officers to respond on that?
Yes, there are some issues which, as a matter of course, are reported to the member for a particular area. That everything, of course. So what a particular member may be interested in, there's no guarantee that they would be notified of it. But things like disposal of property, certain highways issues, and so forth, would, as a matter of course, be reported to the member for the area.
Thank you. It's just interesting that if that's the standard, you know, are there any other opportunities to improve communication? I think, and this it just would enhance people's view of decisions that are being taken, that they're fully informed. Thank you. So I didn't know whether it was a statutory thing or a nice to do thing, but if perhaps I'll just go away and think about that one myself. Thank you.
I'd just say a combination of both, I think, is the answer to that.
Thank you, Laura. And of course, Councillor Julia Berry, you're free to make, separately from this this afternoon's meeting, any comments you may have already made or further ones you want to make to Ruth relevant to her audit. Incidentally, in relation to informing councillors, I did very recently get an email informing me from LCC's development management team of a planning application within my division that they'd received. But that's in relation to planning applications. Okay, so we move on now to agenda item 4, which is a summary of complaints in the last year in relation to code of conduct that have come before the conduct committee. We've got a sheet appended to that covering report that members will have seen. Laura, do you or Josh, do you want to say anything? And then we can bring in Terry and Irene if they wish as well.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Just by way of background, there has been some work being carried on in the last few years in relation to code of conduct matters, and we've been reviewing and updating our policies and procedures as we go along. One of the things we decided to do, which we started last year, was to bring an annual report to this committee, just setting out which complaints we had received about members and how we'd dealt with them. This is the report for the last 12 months. And rather like the report for the preceding 12 months, it does demonstrate that we have really quite a few number of complaints, and those that we do receive tend not to be serious. And just to correct you, that they weren't taken to the conduct committee because that would be the final stage in relation to complaints which are upheld and found to be a breach of the code. What I try to do as monitoring officer is to look at the substance of the complaint. If there's nothing to it, then I would write to the person complaining and say it's not a breach of the code, so it won't go any further. If there is something that you would need to look at, or I need to look at, then I would probably speak to the member concerned and the person who's made the complaint, and I would try and resolve it informally. So if the member recognises that it's something he or she has to apologise for, that is usually forthcoming, and that's the way the matter is resolved informally. The way the code operates, there's very little to be gained in relation to most of the complaints we receive by putting it through the formal conduct committee. So the summary of the complaints we've received are attached to the report. There were a number of complaints received about the same issue, which has not yet been resolved. My feeling is that we have received fewer complaints this year than we normally do, probably because of the pandemic and the meetings that we have, which sometimes can generate some complaints, haven't generated those complaints this year. So that's the complaint. Sorry, that's the report. If anyone has any questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them. Or perhaps you would want to hear from our independent persons before asking any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for Laura and including that correction. I had misunderstood something. Yes, so these haven't been before the conduct committee. Thanks for that clarification. Councillor Alan Vincent, do you want to speak now with your question or observation, or wait until Terry and Irene have spoken?
Well, they may want to comment on it, Chairman.
Okay,
it's just a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
One is it's nice to see that there's a reduction in the number of complaints, and I fully agree with Laura that it may well be something to do with the fact that there's not been any physical meetings of people, because I think people tend to behave themselves rather more impeccably when they're on visual meetings than they do when it's in person. Is my experience. It's just a question, Laura. October 2020, the complaint that was made that is said not to be within the remit of the code. Do we actually, we presumably then log that as a complaint, even though it's outside of the code altogether? It seems a bit strange to me that. I can understand it if you find that there's no breach of the code, because then that is a genuine complaint. But if it's a complaint which doesn't fall within the code at all, then is that a genuine complaint? Should that be logged?
Well, I would say yes, because this is about transparency, both amongst members and officers of the County Council, but for the citizens of Lancashire, so that they can look and see what complaints have been made and how we've dealt with them. So for that reason, I would include everything we receive by way of complaint, unless it is something which clearly doesn't even fall for me to deal with, which we do get from time to time, and those have been omitted.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, thanks, Alan and Laura, for that. Are there any comments from any members? There isn't any RTS. Well, there's, oh yeah. Well, there's IJ, is that?
Irene Devine, Councillor Schofield.
Sorry?
Irene Devine, that's her request to speak.
Oh, yeah. So, go ahead, Irene.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting Terry and I to attend. I think Laura's response to that, from a person outside looking in, the fact that a complaint has been made and it doesn't meet the remit of the code, I think it's important for the public to know why it doesn't, because I think it's very confusing sometimes as to how the code works for the members of the public. So from my point of view, I think it's important that it is recorded and it clearly is identified as not inside the code, not within the code. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene. Have you got any comments, Terry?
No, I haven't got anything at all. I'm listening and learning.
Okay. Thank you. Anyway, it's good that you're both present, as I indicated earlier. If there's no other comments or observations from members of the committee on this, I take it that we're okay in what's been recommended, that we note the summary, and we have commented as we deem to be appropriate. So I take it we're okay to move on now to the other report relating to code of conduct. This is where there's been a review being taken place by officers, including some further advice, so to speak, I understand, by the Local Government Association. Julie, do you want to, is it about this next item? Because I'll get Josh Minot to speak on it first, if you like, Julia.
Yes, I was just getting in there and just booking a place. Thank you very much.
Okay, I won't forget you. So Josh, is it yourself or Laura that just wanted to take us through this, please?
I'll start. Thank you, Chairman, and I'm sure Laura will add anything that I miss. So you will recall at the last meeting of this committee, we brought to you the recommendations of the Nolan Committee as they relate to the future of local government standards. Something that, like many things, has gone a bit on the back burner, but it's still there. So, and the committee charged us with looking at a few of the specific recommendations. You may recall we said we met, or we felt we met, most of the criteria that's set out already. There were a few that we needed a bit of tidying up and a bit of clarification on, and they're listed in the report and in the appendix as well. And the appendix sets out our response. I will admit, by and large, we have taken those from other places where they seem to be fairly universal or where they seem to work. There's no point in trying to reinvent the wheel if someone's done that for us. So in most cases, we've taken the language and the terms used from elsewhere. I don't really feel that there's a need to go through them point by point. I think people will have read them and they'll pick up any questions that they have, but I don't think they're generally controversial or difficult. One that was quite complex to do was the public interest test, because the Nolan Committee called for a clear and straightforward definition of the public interest, which is oxymoronic, to be honest with you. The public interest test is incredibly kind of complicated concept in the first place. But what we have done is, by looking at what other authorities have done, some of whom have kind of multi-page documents trying to set it out, others of whom have done something more like us and tried to get it to at least a page or so. We've just set out the issues that the monitoring officer would consider that taken together give a sense of, would it be in the public interest to pursue a complaint. So that's set out at the Appendix B. So that's the first part, and that's the bit that the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee asked us to do. Now, the second part of this report, you didn't ask us to do, but it happened whilst we were doing that first part of work, and that is that the LGA issued its model code of conduct. Now, this is something that it had been asked to do by the Nolan Committee. It did a fairly wide consultation, and it agreed this in December. And it published that code as a model for all authorities to consider if they wish to adopt. It is entirely voluntary. There is no statutory requirement behind it. If we want to look at it as a whole or parts of it, that's absolutely fine. I haven't put any direct recommendations in relation to it. It is really a document that I've sent to you as a starting point, perhaps, for a discussion on whether you think that this is something that we should pursue further, whether you may think it's absolutely fantastic and say we need that immediately, or you may think that it's not necessary, given that we have a functioning code relatively few complaints, and we seem to be handling them fairly well. So that second part of it is really there for information or to start a discussion or debate. In terms of any recommendations that you make, the code of conduct, if you do want to accept the recommendations that set out in Appendix A and B, it would be for full council to decide ultimately. So your recommendation would be for full council to amend the code of conduct as part of the constitution. I'll leave it there, to be honest with you, Chairman. I think it'd be more interesting to hear your questions or comments than to have me talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. Councillor Julie Berry, would you like to come in now, please, giving you RTS? I think you're mute at the moment.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry about that slight hiccup. I just want to refer back to the minutes of the last meeting, where we obviously did agree to review the code of conduct and seek the contribution of the independent persons, but also we were mindful about setting up an appropriate task and finish group. Now, I do apologise if that's covered in the agenda item 5, but I'm being blinded by the sun at the moment. I can't really focus, but I do have an additional question. So if you want to answer that question, if you'd like to answer that question now, I'll then move on to my second question, if you'll indulge me. Thank you.
Can you take that one, Josh, please?
Yeah, no problem at all. The request was initially for officers to look at it, and in consultation with the political groups, and we did contact all the political groups and ask for their views. We didn't get anything back other than sort of acknowledgements that they looked at it. The task group was a suggestion in case there was another step needed. So if lots came back, or even now, if you kind of are uncertain or feel that there's more needs to be done on any of the aspects that we've reported back on, then we would recommend a more formal task group structure. But the initial recommendation which we followed was for officers to work on it, speak to the political groups, which we did, and come back to you as the committee in the first instance. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that. It's very disappointing to hear that you didn't get any contribution back from political groups, and that moves, being mindful of that, it just moves me on to my next question, which is relating to safeguarding. And I just think this is a strand of, well, it's just our safeguarding policy will determine how well and how officers and councillors conduct themselves. And I'm not sure whether or not, if I asked, randomly asked an officer or a member of a particular political group whether they'd have any grasp really about what I mean by safeguarding. And if we just stick to the behaviour of councillors, often, they might be approached by a colleague, a member of staff, or a resident, and their response around safeguarding should be, go in 3 different directions, I think, and I'm not sure what the structures are within the council. And I just think that sometimes behaviour is locked in political groups, and a bit like you're not getting a response from them. A lot could be addressed if particularly the whips had a better understanding of safeguarding, and also that there was training available and accessible for councillors. Now, I have sort of been on See First, sort of our intranet system, and there are some basic safeguarding training that I think generic that can be used by both members of staff and councillors, but I don't know what the take up is like. I just think that perhaps if we can bring it to the forefront and that we discuss it, perhaps at one of these meetings or in the review possibly, that we would get to grips with. It's quite a challenging issue, because I think that's where generally there's a bit of a, well, nothing really improves. And I think the mistakes are made, they're sort of lost, and you have this view that complaints come that are almost like vexatious because they come from different colleagues within a group or a cross-party bit of a fallout and a problem with behaviour. So all I'm asking is just to look at safeguarding and putting something in perhaps for a bite-sized briefing that would just highlight the need for us all to have an understanding about what it is and how important it is. Thanks.
Julie, before I ask Laura or Josh to come in on that in particular. For me, at least, could you just clarify when you talk about safeguarding? I know in general or particularly there's a lot of training, and it's quite right there should be, and it's updated, including for school governors via their schools about safeguarding of vulnerable adults and children. But are you talking about safeguarding of other counsellors or safeguarding of officers in relation to interaction with counsellors? Because I know there is a protocol existing, isn't there, of counsellor officer relationships? Is that what you're talking about? It's about safeguarding.
I think if you look at that, though, it doesn't clearly say this is about safeguarding. That might be, you know, to deal with, you know, I mean, obviously you've got a bullying policy, probably, a anti-discrimination policy. Safeguarding is just something else. It might just be down to, you know, when we're talking about people's inappropriate behaviour or, you know, raised voices, swearing. It could be all sorts of things. But my main thing is about, is someone who's vulnerable supported by our policies and by our code of conduct? In that, you know, if somebody approaches you, if you don't know how to signpost them or address the issue, or even set a process, you know, sort of a pathway of sort of trying to resolve an issue, I mean, it's just not clear. I just think it needs, and I just think it needs a higher profile.
Yeah, I think I can understand where you're coming from, and I think if we do need to give that a higher profile in the policies and the training, and perhaps within a bite-sized briefing, perhaps Laura and George can comment on that. I do notice that one of the 5 items in Appendix A to the report at agenda item 4 that we've looked at, the first one did come from an officer. So presumably, you know, there is that scope already for officers to make complaints. Any comments, Laura and Josh, on what Councillor Berry has been saying?
Well, I'm happy to look at it and to explore ways in which councillors could be supported, although that may be through the groups rather than through the council itself. What I would say is that I certainly haven't dealt with a complaint from a councillor where it was clear that the conduct complained of had a significant or detrimental impact on that councillor, because I do speak to them and try to get a feeling for what the complaint is about. And I can say that were I to pick that up or to see that it were the case, then I would treat it as being significant and serious, but I haven't encountered it as yet.
Are you saying, Laura, that your view there is scope to pick those up if they do come up?
Well, yes, absolutely. And were it to become clear that a member was complaining about something which had, you know, caused upset or distress, then that would be, in my view, a complaint which I would investigate and treat seriously.
Okay. Are you okay with that, Councillor Berry? Are you muted again?
I don't think it's my place to be. I've raised it, and often, like you say, I think it's quite important to me and significant that the authority hasn't been dealing with complaints of that nature, and that there then lies the problem or the issue. I mean, even if it's just manifesting, you know, with my perception of things, that it's that these issues are sometimes locked into political groups, and they're not forthcoming because there's not a pathway that's looking positive or safe to take, and that's why I'm bringing it up as safeguarding. You know, I mean, you know, that you'll have officers within the council that will deal with members of staff, and there will be officers that deal with, you know, members of the public. You know, that staff on a daily basis must come across vulnerable people, and obviously they have a protocol to follow. I just want it to be absolutely clear to councillors, and particularly whips, who are sort of safe, so almost like custodians. You know, they look after conduct. are aware that what route to take with anything that's raised with them. I just think there's the barriers in place at the moment. Thanks.
Well, perhaps, Julia, you could, after the meeting, give particular examples that you feel do exist or have existed and email them to Laura. But in relation to the role of group whips, I know that Laura and Josh, I believe, from time to time, when they felt necessary, have had meetings with the group whips where there's been matters of concern. That's right, isn't it, Laura?
Yes.
You're muted, Laura.
Sorry, my apologies. I was just saying, also being addressed by the chairman of the council meeting, usually full council, where it's felt that there has been a need to remind members of code of conduct and how their conduct can be impacting on other members. So that is something which we remind people of, both in virtual meetings and meetings in person.
Okay, thank you. Members of the committee, we do need to address this report compiled by Josh Minot at agenda item 5, and particularly the recommendations relating to appendices A and B. My understanding is, yes, if we're minded to agree those recommendations, they will go to a meeting of the full council for discussion and approval if the full council so wish to embody those in the code of conduct, and that would likely be not the next meeting of the full council on the 11th of February, which is devoted entirely, as we're aware, to the budget and council tax setting, but the one in a couple of weeks after that, in late February. But if we had some particular significant changes to this, is it the case? I think it's the case, Josh. Is it that the what's it called, the Political Governance Working Party may have to be involved as well?
Yes, Chairman. I think, I mean, if you're happy with the those changes proposed in Appendix A and B, particularly, I mean, they can go straight on to full council. If you feel that there is some complexity there or some need for further discussion, then I would suggest something like the Political Governance Working Group in advance of full council to iron out those issues. If you were minded to look further at the model code published by the LGA, I would strongly suggest that you don't just sort of say yes or no to that now. Well, you can say no to it now if you like, because we do have a fully functioning code. But if you are inclined to say, actually, there may be something in there that would be useful for us, I would suggest that is a slightly longer term piece of work that you might want to give to a working group, such as the Political Governance Working Group, something like that, if you are minded to. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Josh. So it's a matter whether anybody would like to propose that we agree those recommendations or not, if we want to vary them in Appendix A and B, and whether, I take it you mean what you were just talking about then, Josh, was what's in Appendix C, if we want to then discuss that further at, say, our next meeting, or, as Josh has indicated we could do, refer that further review to the Political Governance Working Party. Anybody like a view or would like to propose something on those? Yes, Ed.
Yeah, I've read these a few times. They seem very comprehensive. I'm just wondering that if we were to send them back for further review, we'd only be shaving off the edges or putting ticks and commas in. I really think it could go on for a long time, twiddling around the edges of what is a very important part of this council. So I'm minded to propose that we accept the recommendation and put it to full council, but that we monitor what's going on with the conduct group for any future amendments, taken into consideration what Julia's been talking about, but really I think that's going to take a little time to filter through the system. So my proposal is to go with it at the moment.
Thank you, Ed. So you're proposing that we accept the recommendation that's on page 1 of the report,
Correct.
and to and for the further review to do with what we're saying about that one.
Well, we monitored any further review. Julia's started down a path. If we wait for it to go further on, then this could go on for a long time. And I think we need something, and it's a very comprehensive and I think very sound document as it stands, but it is a document in progress. We keep working on it. And as things happen, they'll probably amend it and they come back to this committee. But we've also got a working group looking at it as well. So you wonder how much time we have to spend on this until we actually put it to full council.
Is that a appropriate wording for the resolution before I ask you if somebody wants to second it, Josh and Laura?
If I can, Chairman, I suppose I'd just like to be absolutely clear. If you're happy with the amendments suggested in Appendix A and B, then just move them straight to full council. And it sounds to me like the real question. I mean, I personally feel that there's no issue with those. They seem to do the job. They do the job in other authorities or elsewhere, so we can adopt them wholesale, and they immediately answer the questions raised by the Nolan committee. The bigger question, I suppose, is that to do with Appendix C, and I suppose what I would suggest is that you propose that full council adopt the amendments in Appendices A and B, and in relation to Appendix C, I don't really feel I can advise you. I don't have a feel for how many other authorities have already adopted that model code. I personally think that if we're going to adopt a brand new code, as in take Appendix C wholesale and just make that our code, I think I would like to do a little bit more work on it with politicians, to be honest with you. So my view would be, if you're minded to accept A and B, and if you're minded that it may be something that is useful, to look into some kind of extended work, either through your committee or the Political Governance Working Group, on the Appendix C, that the model code issued by the LGA, and that's not urgent. There's no rush to do that. We could do that over a couple of meetings perhaps, and have something ready for example, for the May AGM of full council. But that's the clarity we need, if we can have that from the committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Did you want to second something on those lines, Julia, or was it a different comment you had?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'd like to second what Councillor Nash suggested, and I take on board what Josh is saying about acceptance. I wouldn't want what I've raised today around safeguarding to hinder the progress of an updated code of conduct, and I welcome the opportunity to give it more public scrutiny at full council. Thank you.
Right, so just to be clear, and for Josh as well, I was saying that in this second part of the resolution we're making, apart from agreeing the recommendations that the office is making to go to the full council in relation to Appendices A and B, I was saying then with Appendix C, the whole new code of conduct, that the new model, that it's this committee, we will review that again at our next meeting. Or are we happy for that to involve instead the Political Governance Working Group? We just need to be clear on that, don't we? So there's no ambiguity in the resolution.
Chairman, I think Councillor John Shedwick's indicated.
Is that the case, John?
Yeah, it was just whether it's appropriate within this discussion just to hear from our independent members. I'll leave that to you, Chair.
Yes, although they're welcome to come in, Terry or Irene, if you wish, on this. Although the point I just wanted to just bottom, if you like, is just within the appropriate structures, so to speak, of LCC. Do you want to comment, Terry or Irene?
No, I have nothing to add to what's already written and this debated, so I'll leave it to progress.
Okay. Have you any observation, Irene?
No, I have no observations either. Thank you very much for asking.
Okay.
Yeah, no problems at all.
Okay. So, Ed, do you want to just clarify what the latter part of your recommendation, of your proposal?
I well understand what both Josh and Julia have said, but I think it's necessary to put the thing to full council, omitting Appendix C, which can be put back to the governance working group for further work. So my proposal is that it is taken that we put the code of conduct to full council, with the exception of Annex C, which requires further study.
And I'd like to formally second that. Thank you.
Just to be clear, I don't want to egg this point too long, but does that mean, how would this committee, when you're saying the governance working group, you mean the political governance working group that is separate from this committee, Ed? You're talking about Appendix C being considered by that body and not necessarily this committee in future. Is that right?
No, it can be looked at by that body, but it should come back to this committee for endorsement before it's put to full council.
Very good. That sounds even better to me. If that's appropriate wording the officers can live with, so to speak, can I take it that we're all in favour of that? Any objections? Tony, do you want to speak? I saw you putting your hand up then. No? No? Okay, misunderstood your gesture. Okay, I take it we're okay on that. Thank you very much. Yes, thumbs up as well. Yes, thank you very much. That's even better. All right, we move to one or two items that will be presented by our external audit friends, Grant Thornton, in the shape of Paul Dossett here this afternoon. So over to you, Paul, for agenda item 6, the LCC audit findings report for 2019-20 financial year, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members will recall that we presented an earlier version of this report to the meeting in October. I think before I go on to update where we are, it's probably worth putting a bit of context into this report. So probably about 3 to 4 years ago, AMHCLG, and partly because of their broader drive for earlier accounts and whole of government accounts and getting the government's accounts sorted as early as possible, partly to ensure the government can plan its budgetary arrangements, etc., in a more timely manner, and obviously to provide local authorities with a degree of surety about their financial positions by having their accounts signed off early as well. Government for 17-18 brought forward the timetable for accounts to be signed off to July the 31st of each year, having previously been in September, and brought forward the timetable for preparation from June, end of June to end of May. So a real push to speed that process up. Unfortunately, that coincided with the government's own concerns about the quality of audit in the corporate sector and the sort of regulatory environment that existed at the time that allowed these failings to happen in government's views. So Carillion, BHS, Patisserie Valerie, a whole range of corporate failures where there was a significant challenge to the audit profession and the regulator of the audit profession, the FRC, as to what the auditor was doing in these particular cases when accounts were signed off and then these companies collapsed relatively shortly afterwards. And so government and various reviews have put the pressure on the FRC to be a much stronger corporate regulator, and that certainly has happened. And so there's lots of change in the FRC and lots of change in their approach. That's impacted on all of the firms who are involved in company audit. Now, that relevance of that to local audit is that all of those procedures and processes then effectively dribble down into local audit, because there is no longer an audit commission or anyone else to decide what local auditors should do other than the FRC, who report on the work of local auditors. And so the FRC have brought their approach from corporate audit very much into the local audit arena, which has required more and more work to be done. And from in 17-18, which is the first year of the July sign-off, something like 85% of audits were signed off by July the 31st. Moving on to 18-19, the first year where the FRC changes really bit in terms of local auditors, that percentage was much lower. It was down in the 50s. Moving on to 19-20, when further audit requirements are in place, some of which were linked to the impact of COVID-19, but others are just further sort of audit standards requirements. Although the deadline was shifted due to COVID from accounts production by 31st of August and audit by 30th of November, which you might have thought would make the whole process more straightforward or easier to meet the deadline at least, we ended up with a 45% sign-off record. And that's all relevant because that shows where we are in terms of the environment at the moment. And moving on to Lancashire, we commenced the audit, having received the accounts at the end of July. The audit has actually gone well for virtually all areas, and officers have been very cooperative. And we reported to you on October the 19th where we were on a number of issues, and we were largely finished at that stage. An issue has come up towards the end of the audit, which is set out on page 53 of your pack, which relates to financial instruments. And I should confirm that in all other respects, the audit is complete, but there's this one outstanding issue in respect of financial instruments and the valuation of your LOBOs in your accounts, with your LOBO investments in your accounts. And we've gone through a process. We've been challenged by our technical team to review those LOBOs in more detail. We've gone through a process of taking some external advice on this, and then have moved on to confirm some of that with internal advice. That internal advice is very, very close to being finalised. Not quite there yet. I thought I was going to get there for Friday, but it's not quite there ready yet. There's a few things I'll need to go through with the valuation team just to clarify our final position on this. So it is the only thing outstanding that's preventing us from signing the audit at the moment. So we're not sort of continuing to do lots of testing or anything else, but it's just this one issue. So as soon as we're able to resolve this one issue, we will be able to sign the audit off, assuming we can resolve this one issue. But there's nothing else outstanding in respect to the audit. So on that paper, Chairman, I will stop there and ask if there's any particular questions on the LCC audit.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. Before I ask if any other members of the committee want to make any comments or queries, would it be not very long in the future, do you think? Will it be quite a short time before that outstanding issue is resolved?
I think so. I'm certainly looking to resolve it this week and come back to officers. I mean, the valuation process has required asking for a little bit more information, but I'm sure that will be forthcoming quickly. But but it's definitely in train, and we're very close. We've had some initial assessments. We just need to go through some of the individual valuations in a bit more detail with the valuer to clarify some of his thinking. So I'm hopeful, very hopeful, that we will get a view this week, very clearly from the valuer.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Any comments at all from any members of the committee? No. Well, I take it then we're okay to acknowledge that we note the findings in the Grant Thornton report, etc. That's in that recommendation. Nobody's indicating otherwise. Thank you very much. Before we move on to agenda item 7, which is a corresponding one in relation to the LCC administered pension fund accounts and the audit findings, just to mention to you, Terry and Irene, as I said earlier, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you did want to leave, we won't be offended. And just signify that you're exiting, and we're very grateful for you that you've been able to join us this afternoon, and we appreciated the comments and the attention that you've given. Okay, so I'll leave that with you. We move on now to, as I say, agenda item 7, and it's over to you again, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Not much to say on this report. When we reported to you last time, there was a few investment letters and a few other bits of detail outstanding. They've all now been received. There's no further work required on the pension fund. We completed some work between the last meeting and this meeting on the IS-19 letters, which are letters of assurance that we give to other members of the pension fund, the sort of districts and other bodies. And the only reason it isn't signed off is that it can't be signed off until the county's signed off. It works in tandem. So there's no further work required, nothing else to do. So as soon as the county's ready to sign off, the pension fund will be ready to sign off. Happy to take any questions on that, Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions or observations from any members of the committee? No. Okay. Thank you for that, Paul. So we're okay to note that as per the recommendation on page 1 of that report, covering report. So it's back to you for a third time on agenda item 8. That's the audit progress report in relation to the current year.
Thank you, Chairman. I think if I take members straight to page 109 of your report, of your pack, sorry, it outlines the new arrangements for value for money for the new year, and there's a number of pages on that. I think what I'd say about this is that the key is that for the previous 5 years, we've had to basically work on a sort of risk basis. So if we identified a significant financial risk or other risk in a council, we would do some work about it and report to you on that risk. So that was in a sense by exception. I mean, obviously in the last few years, financial position of local authorities has always been something that auditors would tend to look at, but generally speaking, other things are not looked at unless they're an obviously glaring big issue. Under the new code, the National Audit Office have decided that they want a bit more positive assurance. So auditors are required to do 3 things. 1, review financial sustainability and give a conclusion on that, or a review on that at all audits. The second is to consider the council's governance arrangements, review those in detail and give a view on that. And the third area is economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and give a view on that. And economy, efficiency and effectiveness is probably largely around things like how the council benchmarks itself against others, how it demonstrates it's achieved sort of best value in its procurement, that type of thing. So we have to give a positive view on that. So what you will see, you know, for the 2021 audit is not this one report, the audit findings report that you've got here, but two separate reports. The audit findings report will cover the accounts audit essentially, and the auditor's report will be the value for money report. So a separate report of similar status to the audit findings report, because the National Audit Office have been of the view that the value for money type work has been underplayed in the last few years, and clearly in the light of things like, you know, Nottingham City Council, Croydon, some of the challenges at Liverpool and elsewhere, they think auditors need to be given a bit more attention to the wider arrangements in a local authority rather than just the accounts, and so you'll see a different feel for that. It won't result in a conclusion. Previously, the previous regime was a fairly binary, qualified or unqualified. What this regime will result in is a commentary on all of those three areas, and only sort of extreme statutory action is when you might see something different from a commentary. So, for example, statutory recommendations or public interest reports. Obviously, most councils we'd hope would get to that place, but so generally you might just expect a commentary on the work we've done in those three areas. And the rest of this sort of update also reflects, and this links back to what I was saying really about regulation more broadly. There's lots of new auditing standards and requirements coming in. Probably the most important one is that of estimates. The FRC have obviously identified from corporate audit that, you know, organisations have taken one view of estimates which auditors may have accepted too readily, and so there's a lot more work required from 2021 onwards on estimates, and that from your point of view that will impact on two areas principally, which are asset valuation and the pension liability. Possibly some stuff on provisions as well, but that may be of smaller scale. And one of the things for this committee, for example, that will be relevant will be that there will be an expectation that in the summer, in and around, possibly before the accounts are prepared, there will be an expectation from management to bring to you a sort of paper that sets out their approach to estimates. At the moment, generally speaking, you get that approach set out in the accounts, but there's now a new requirement to have a sort of separate approach to estimates. So that management, for example, could say, yeah, well, we've done this, we've engaged an expert to do an evaluation, and we are satisfied that that's a reasonable estimation, or whatever management wants to take about those sorts of things. On bad debt provision, it could be about assessing whether or not management have been bold in their bad debt provision, prudent, whatever they feel that their approach has been, ought to be relayed from now onwards to audit committee for consideration. So I think that just reflects the fact there's more auditing work to do in 2021. There's also some more work on the going concern, because there's a new standard on that. It's a new standard on fraud that we have to do a little bit more work on as well. So I think I'm just trying to reflect what we reflected in this paper is the requirement for audit and the requirements of auditors are being ramped up all the time. And that's just a function really of the fact that there's been too much corporate failure in audit in the past 3 to 4 years, and government are obviously not satisfied with audit, and therefore via the FRC it is sort of pushing up standards and requiring more work to be done than has previously been done. I'll stop there, Chairman, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Paul, for that presentation or tour of some particularly relevant and important issues. Yeah, and I think you referred as well there to what you said earlier about the FRC. Have I got the name right? The Financial Reporting Council,
Indeed.
where they naturally have been concerned about corporate failures in the private sector companies that have shown that some increased effectiveness of the respective audits needs to be improved. And they've been looking at the public sector as well. But of course, when you talked earlier about the demise a few years back of the Audit Commission, of course, one of their functions was taken over by the existing and continuing National Audit Office, and it's the NAO, I see, as you referred to, that are bringing in some changes in the value for money part of the work that's required. Any comments for any other members of the committee before we move on? In that case, I think we can. Yes, Julia, Councillor Berry, please.
Hello, I'd just like to mention two items for agenda item 8. I welcome the inclusion in the report, the pages on 107 regarding local government reorganisation, and it's one really for our decision-making audit that whilst this has been discussed and decisions been made about a path that Lancashire County Council wants to take, we haven't had full discussion with the full council regarding everyone's views around which direction we should be going if we did undertake reorganisation. Obviously, there's a link for the full report, which I just wanted to highlight to other members, perhaps those that are watching. And secondly, I'd like to applaud whoever constructed this agenda item, because we've got some very, very welcome graphics that make things more accessible and aiding and supporting people's learning and experience at committees like this. And I'd like to see more of that. It's very, very welcome indeed, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Julia Berry. Okay.
Chairman, John Shedwick, could I?
Oh, yes, please. Go ahead, John.
Could I just thank Paul for that? I think, the non-technical description at the end actually took us through the report when you said the ramping up right across the piece of your audit. And in particular, just to pick out one element, asset valuation. We've been to this before. That's going to involve considerably more work. So would you then be having independent valuations on general asset valuations?
So it's a good question, Councillor. So what we have done this year, which is a further ramping of what we did in previous years, is we have engaged our own valuer to review your valuer's work and challenge the findings of that work. And what they have done, generally speaking, is to focus on the valuer's report and ask some challenge questions on methodologies, assumptions, etc. So that's where we got to for 1920. You're absolutely right, actually, that with with some of the sort of sensitivities there might be in terms of ranges of valuation, you could get to a situation where we might be required to ask our valuer, if, for example, the council says this asset is worth X million, and it might be asked to actually ask our valuer to do some work on that to potentially sort of challenge that valuation a bit more. It's possible. I'm not 100% certain it will come to that, but it is possible. I can see that happening at some councils in the next couple of years. I mean, just to give you an illustration, whilst I don't think we've had any specific challenges with your valuers around the country, many of the audits that are not signed off are related to valuation issues, and some of which have resulted in departures of valuers and replacement of firms of valuers and replacement of internal valuers because they haven't got the data correct and they haven't got the evidence for their views, etc. So it's an increasingly high profile issue, and therefore we will place even more scrutiny on it this year. And just to give a further reflection on that, the FRC don't just sort of pronounce on what things should be. They review the work of auditors. So for 1819, when they finished their review of 1819, they told us effectively we needed to get the valuer in for every large audit, which is what we've done for 1920. They're currently looking at the 1920 audits. It's quite possible they might have some other requirement of us in respect of asset valuations. Of course, we'll update the committee if that's the case as part of our planning process. But a lot of the extra things we do are driven by the requirements of the FRC. And what that has led to, is it's worth flagging this up actually, is the fee envelope we were originally given, or councils were originally given via the PSAA framework contract, has suddenly become very out of date. And additional fees have been levied to cover off the new FRC requirements and new standards requirements. That has now been officially recognised by government, and in their response to the Redmond review in December, just released just before Christmas, government promised an extra £15 million to be received in 21-22, but related to the 2021 audits, to give to local authorities to fund the additional cost of local audit because of these new requirements, which is very welcome, because I think personally I think it's a bit unreasonable to sort of effectively the government to put new audit requirements in and then not to fund local authorities for it. But it looks like they've got that message now, and they're putting £15 million into the system for the 2021 audits. So council should in from April onwards receive its share of that funding. I don't know how it's going to be allocated, but you should receive your share of that funding.
Well, thank you so much. That was a detailed explanation, and I thought we might finish up at the aspect of fees, and we did. Thank you.
Yes, John, it all boils down to money one way or another, doesn't it? Yeah, I'm sure Director of Finance Neil, who's present, will be